Alright, so we're going to look at Project 6, which was dealing with the Bezold Effect and color, pattern, and texture. Pattern being one of the oldest forms of design, and every culture has pattern tradition. And pattern, of course, occurs with repetition of elements. And pattern inherently, visual pattern and physical pattern, tactile pattern, have repetition. Some patterns are very ordered, some are much more random in structure, but they all have a structure. So our problem was to deal with pattern and deal with rhythm, a progressive rhythm, because once you have pattern, you automatically create rhythm. So pattern, texture, rhythm all merge together and work concurrently because they're all inherent in the idea of repetition of elements or a repetition of similar elements. So we were to take a structured grid-based pattern that can include shapes and lines, or just shapes, or just lines, that collectively contributed to an overall visual texture, which means there was a sense of surface visually. And through change over the distance of the design expresses progressive rhythm. That means that the pattern changes throughout the design. And you were to create the pattern and then do a repeat of it. So you would have two designs. In each one you could use 3 colors. Establish the colors in the first one, and then in the second one use the same colors but change one. So a total of 4 colors within the overall design. And the idea was to keep everything the same except to change out one color. Don't change out 2 or all 3 colors. Don't switch colors around. Just change out one color to look at what the visual effect is going to be. And you had to deal with a golden rectangle as a size, a proportion. And you had to deal with the golden rectangle as the proportional understanding of your design space and based off an 8-inch square. You could make it horizontal or vertical. You could make it horizontal or vertical in orientation. You had all the color in the world available to you, and you could do this by hand and also digitally. And a few of you did it digitally, most of you did it by hand, which is fine. So the key elements here are structured, grid-based pattern. So we're basically looking for an informal or formal structure underneath your pattern. And with pattern, if you don't consider structure, there's a lot of weakness in the result. And as of this recording, I have not looked at the journals, so I have not seen the preliminary work yet. So we're basically just flying blind here. So let's take a look. Remember that the Bezold effect is a visual phenomenon where when you change out one color in a design, the entire design changes. And depending upon the color that you change, the design will be drastically different. So what we're looking for here is that color change. We're also looking for the structure of the design and what colors you used. And I believe there was a key component of this in that you were to draw from nature. You were to go out with your camera, taking a walk or taking a drive and taking photos of patterns found in nature. And those photos would inform your design decisions, your pattern, as well as the colors that you use. So this should have been a fun assignment. Get you outdoors and get you looking at things differently. Get you looking at the natural world perhaps differently than you normally do. And utilizing what's all around you to inspire a design decision. And hopefully this has been your best work to date in the class. We'll start with this one. Obviously, changing from the violet to the yellow creates a very different impression. The top design has a richer sense of space. It has actually a stronger sense of movement. It has less value contrast than what's going on in the lower design. In the lower design, the yellow really kind of takes over everything. And then the red is also fairly full saturation, and then the blue looks like it's probably close to full saturation but shaded. So we have a lot of vivid color here. Value contrast basically saves the design in terms of it being easy to look at. This one is much more easy to look at. The progression is in the expansion of the rays as they get wider or larger toward the perimeter. This seems to start or be centered on the division, the Fibonacci division, the golden mean, because there's a square concept right there. And so the space is used well because it's actually acknowledging overall the totality of the space, the proportion of height to width. The circular elements don't progress. They basically contrast each other. We have increasing in scale and we have decreasing in scale. And so the circles tend to flatten the space, whereas the radiant elements tend to want to create a sense of depth. We are using only 4 colors. We have the violet, we have the red and the blue, and here we have the yellow, the red, and the blue. So overall, it's a successful design. There is progression. It is analog. It's done in gouache or some other form of paint, probably gouache. And the craftsmanship is pretty good. So here we have an alternating rhythm. It's a metric rhythm. And we have the column and then the vine, and then the column and then the vine, and the column and the vine and the column. And the column is kind of cut off funny here. We do have a sense that this is a larger design, and we're looking at a piece of it because we're not seeing the totality of the column over here. Definitely the shapes derive from organic form. And we have a pink, a red, a green, and a yellow. And then in the lower design, the pink is substituted out with blue. There is greater value contrast between the pink and the green here. Here the blue, especially over here, is very similar in value. So we don't get the separation of the shapes here the same way that we do here. Now, if perhaps the yellow had been substituted for the blue, we'd have a very different expression. Both designs are different, but they're not as different as they could be. So allowing the Bezold effect to be explored in terms of what one change of color does to the design, it could have been pushed further. There is no progression here, and there is no sense of movement across the space, going from a change of direction, a change in frequency, a change in shape. None of that is happening. It's definitely all metric or alternating rhythm from start to finish, and therefore it's not addressing the progressive rhythm aspect of the problem. It's not addressing the frequency aspect. We are getting a sense of surface texture in the columns, but that's broken up by the vines. This is also done analog in gouache, and again, the craftsmanship is pretty good on this. Good handling of the linear elements and the details. Okay, just changing out the lighter blue, the cyan blue, for the kind of French blue does make a big difference in terms of how the design actually feels. The abstraction is not real clear. What is this abstracted from? And we'll have to go to the journal to understand what's going on with that. But we have very tinted yellow in appearance, and that makes the grid. This is an active composition. It fits the space very well. Nothing really feels cut off, except for maybe right up here. This whole design has a sense of being farther away from us than this design, because the values here, the lighter blue and then the yellow, come forward and send the darker blue back, whereas everything over here kind of sits in the background, and then the yellow sort of comes forward a little bit. But this seems like there's a foreground plane, and then the darker blue with the smaller linear elements is in the background. And over here, everything is kind of merging into the same plane, and it seems to be sitting mid-distance or farther away. There's a lot of variety, but still a lot of unity in this, so there are really some strong points to it. The zigzag lines are common to 50% of the design, but they're not regimented in terms of how they're deployed in the design. Starting with just 2 shapes here, and then 3 shapes, and then going back to 2 and going to 3, and then suddenly breaking it up further. The lower part of the design, each side, doesn't give us enough really to create a sense of surface texture. We're not warping the surface, we're not calling attention to the surface so much. We get a little more texture here. There is definitely a progression. It could have probably started at this size and gone smaller. And if this is done digitally, and it kind of looks like maybe it has. So what is not contributing to the sense of surface texture, the sense of tactility, is the large and infrequent shapes in the lower part of the design. So as I said, it should have started somewhere in here and then gone from there smaller. So within each square, we kind of have a sense of texture because of the repeated zigzag pattern, but overall in the designs we don't. And there's a few things that are not quite clear. If we come up here, there's some issues right in here. There's a lot of artifacts and things like that. So the handling of the digital medium really is, it could be better. The linear elements, some are thick and some are thin, so what is it meant to be? Because we have a really thick line here, and then over here it is thinner, so what is going on with all of that? Here we do have a sense of progression. We have the larger elements, and then moving, kind of scattering in a sense of randomness into slightly smaller, more negative space between, so more dispersed rather than concentrated. And then we have more concentrated and then larger and more precise here. So it's kind of interesting. This is the only real precise lineup in the entire design. So this is the anomaly. It's an odd man out because it doesn't really fit with everything because it is so precise. Nothing else is that precise. So why just have that one row over there on the left-hand side? What does that mean? What's the decision about that? How did that come to be and why? So changing from the tinted green to the tinted blue, we have less value contrast here between the blue and the green background. Here we have a analogous scheme here. Because of the yellow and the blue, we now have a partial triad. There is a little more activity, a little more energy in the top design simply because the lighter green is that much lighter than the green background. So the Bezold effect is working here. Could it have worked better with a different color change? Could it have worked better if the background were changed to blue instead of the ellipses? So there's a variety of ways that things could have gone here. This has kind of a sense of water, maybe like a shoreline, and the light sparkling on the water, and then we get the kind of ebb and flow of waves lapping on the shore or something like that. There's that kind of sense to it. It does feel very organic. It's very interesting. The only thing that really is of a concern is the precision over here and what that means. This is done in gouache. It's an interesting division of space structurally. The space has been divided into 4 parts vertically. The 2 middle sections tend to appear to be the same height, but then we're shorter here and even shorter here. So the rationale, the reasoning for those horizontal breaks, those vertical divisions, is a little bit questionable. Within each division, we do have the wider diamond, and then it becomes compressed and becomes compressed over here. And so there is a sense of movement, but because of the horizontal breaks, we don't get the movement of the whole surface. So it's within each section, there is a progression, but not throughout the entire design. And then we've changed the green for the blue. And the green is darker, the blue is lighter, so the design on the left is a little more active because it has more value contrast than the design on the right. So in terms of the design decisions made, those divisions that are dividing the space vertically, 1, 2, 3, 4, the major question is why? Because it doesn't quite make sense how it's divided. Okay, definitely digital. Two ideas going on here. We have a progression in the diamonds going into kind of a kite shape. So we actually have a change of shape here, but it's a sudden change of shape. We have a diamond row and a diamond row, and then we have the kite row. And then there's nothing up here. So this becomes empty and has a sense of being unused. Nothing is breaking that border, really. Nothing is breaking up into the top area. We do have a sense of texture with the foliage that's kind of curling up and around. The Bezold Effect, we have the more intense red and then the tinted red. Obviously more energy here afforded by the red-green combination, but also more value contrast. The pink here is very close in value to the green, and therefore this becomes much quieter. Here the lighter diamonds and the kite shapes pop forward, and they actually compete with the foliage. And over here is the actual foliage itself. And then the diamonds and the pink, because of lack of value contrast, merge together. So if we were to turn this into a grayscale. So design decisions to leave this empty. What is the reason for that? Because certainly, given this entire space, you are the master of the space that you design. You're always going to be given the height and width and depth of something. And then what you do within that space is entirely up to you. So you are the master of that space in terms of how you design within it. So we have a complicated design because we have two different ideas that don't really seem to work together. We have the geometric diamonds and the kites. Why go to the kites when it looks like we may have had room for the diamonds? It looks like these are about a third of the way vertically. So from here to here is 1/3, from here to here is another third, and from here to the base edge is the third. So why not take the diamonds all the way up? The reason is that you're calling attention to this space. You're kind of framing it between the frame of reference of the design and then the crenellated shape of the diamonds. We don't see it as much over here because of the lack of value contrast, but it is there. This kind of feels like the design has been truncated somehow, or it doesn't quite fit the design space comfortably. So in terms of bringing everything together that we've talked about into this assignment, there are certain things that were overlooked in terms of utilizing the space to its best advantage. Okay, here we do have a progression in scale. We have the larger leaves and the smaller leaves, and then we have the linear elements. In both designs, we focus on the linear elements because that's where the greatest value difference is between anything. The lines in the background are actually the greatest value contrast, and so that's what the eye will focus on. The green is not much lighter than the orange. The green looks like it's tinted a bit, the blue looks tinted, and the orange looks shaded. Now there's some black in here. So we actually have 4 colors in each design, and not sure what's going on there. This appears to be digital. It is not looking really like gouache. The sense of surface texture, we don't really have enough frequency to create surface texture. We do have a lot of movement. We do have progression. The Bezold effect is there. It could be mightily different if the background were changed out, or we used a color in the change that was a lot lighter or a lot darker than what we have here. But we do have black for whatever reason. Certainly the design that has more energy is the bottom design because we have the opposing colors. So we have the green and the blue, so there's blue in the green. We have the yellow in the green, there's yellow in the green. So that's an analogous, very calm color scheme. And then here we have the orange, which is an opposing hue, an opposing color to the blue. And it's analogous to yellow. So there is more sense of energy here. And also the orange is darker, as I said, and has a little more value contrast than what's going on here. Two colors were changed because we have actually in between the two designs we've used the same three colors, but we've changed out their position. So in the top design, the yellow-orange is in the framework. So the grid, the structure is active in this, and then the darker orange is doing the fill. And here, that darker orange is doing the grid, and then the yellow-orange is doing the fill. Definitely very different designs. Also, they're not exactly the same. If we look at what's happening here, it's actually a different design. And that could be because it's hand-drawn, but there's less distance here than there is here. So something happened in the translation. Also, we have some curling and some things happening that really aren't making for the best presentation, although it's presented on a fairly clean sheet of, looks like Canson. So overall, it's clean, it's trimmed well. The problem is that the paper is kind of curling, and so the rubber cement's not being used as a two-coat issue or a two-coat process. The Bezold effect, I mean, obviously the change of one color would make a difference here, but then two colors were switched to make the second design, and that's not the assignment, so that's out of bounds of what we were doing. So there are three colors used between the two designs, not four. The second design was meant to be the exact same, except changing out one color. So between the two designs as a pair, you would be using four colors. The structure, the composition of this is pretty nice. It has a lot of variety. There's a lot of unity to it. Overall, the color choices work together really well, but the assignment, the creative brief, the assignment requirements were not satisfied fully.